Martin Luther, German religious leader. Martin Luther, who was born in Eisleben, Germany, in 1483, went on to become one of the most important figures in Western history. As a monk and student, Luther lived in relative obscurity for most of his early years. But in 1517, Luther sent a letter criticizing the corrupt Catholic Church for using the sale of indulgences to cover up wrongdoing. His 95 Theses, which outlined two fundamental ideas, that the Bible is the only source of religious authority, and that people can only be saved through faith and not by good works, were what ignited the Protestant Reformation. Although these ideas had been advanced before, Martin Luther codified them at a moment in history ripe for religious reformation. The Catholic Church was subsequently split, and Luther's ideas had a significant influence on the emerging Protestantism. His writings altered the direction of Western religious and cultural history. Early life. In Eisleben, Saxony, a province of the Holy Roman Empire, to parents Hans and Margareta, Martin Luther was born. When Luther was a young child, Luther's father, a successful businessman, relocated the family of 10 to Mansfeld. Luther started attending a nearby school when he was 5 years old, where he learned Latin, reading, and writing. At age 13, Luther enrolled in a Brethren of the Common Life school in Magdeburg. Because of the Brethren's emphasis on individual piety, Luther became interested in monastic life while he was there. Martin Luther enters the monastery. Young Martin was removed from the school in Magdeburg and transferred to a new school in Eisenach. However, Hans Luther had other intentions for him. He wanted him to become a lawyer. Later, in 1501, Luther enrolled at the University of Erfurt, then Germany's top institution of higher learning. He completed his studies there in 1505, earning a master's degree in the traditional fields of mathematics, astronomy, geometry, and philosophy. That year, in July, Luther was caught in a severe thunderstorm during which a lightning strike came dangerously close to striking him. He thought the encounter was a sign from God and swore to become a monk if he survived the storm. The storm passed, Luther survived unharmed, and on July 17, 1505, as he had promised, Luther abandoned his legal research. He went into an Augustinian monastery instead. Luther started leading a simple, austere life as a monk, yet he continued to pursue his academic interests. Luther attended a university in Wittenberg and the University of Erfurt between 1507 and 1510. He took a detour from his studies in 1510,151 to represent the German Augustinian monasteries in Rome. Luther earned his degree in 1512 and started teaching biblical studies. Luther's continued theological research over the ensuing 5 years would bring him to realizations that would influence Christian thought for centuries to come. Martin Luther questions the Catholic Church. Early in the 16th century, the beliefs of the Roman Catholic Church were being questioned by some theologians and academics in Europe. The Bible and Augustine's writings, two early church philosophers, became more widely available during this time as well as translations of original literature. Augustine had emphasized the supremacy of the Bible rather than church officials as the ultimate religious authority. Additionally, he held that only God could grant salvation by his divine grace, and that humanity could not achieve salvation through their own efforts. The Catholic Church maintained that performing good deeds, or acts of righteousness, that pleased God, was a prerequisite for salvation during the Middle Ages. Luther eventually came to agree with Augustine's two core doctrines, which would later serve as the cornerstone of Protestantism. In the meantime, the Catholic Church's custom of giving indulgences to forgive offenders degenerated into corruption. Germany had outlawed the sale of indulgences, but the practice persisted. In order to earn money for the restoration of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, a Franciscan by the name of Johann Tetzel started selling indulgences in Germany in 1517. The 95 Theses, committed to the belief that salvation might be gained through faith, and by divine grace only, Luther fiercely protested the immoral practice of selling indulgences. Based on this conviction, he penned the 95 Theses, a set of arguments and questions for discussion, commonly known as the Disputation on the Power and Efficacy of Indulgences. According to a well-known urban legend, on October 31, 1517, Luther defiantly attached a copy of his 95 Theses to the Wittenberg Castle Church's door. The reality was probably not that dramatic. Luther more likely hung the document on the door of the church matter-of-factly to herald the ensuing scholarly discussion around it that he was arranging. The 95 Theses were written in a remarkably academic and humble tone, accusing rather than questioning, and would later serve as the cornerstone of the Protestant Reformation. The document's main points were nevertheless highly inflammatory. Luther's fundamental beliefs, that God wanted believers to seek repentance and that redemption came through faith alone, not through works, were stated in the first two theses. These first two were supported by the other 93 theses, several of which directly attacked the use of indulgences. Martin Luther's later years. In 1521, Luther made his way back to Wittenberg, where the reform movement he had helped start had outgrown his capacity to influence it. It had evolved into a political cause and was no longer only a theological one. While other politicians took the helm of the reform, the Peasants' War, an uprising, was spreading throughout Germany. Luther wed Catherine of Bora, a former nun, in 1525 after earlier writing against the Church's insistence on clerical celibacy. They have 5 children. Luther's early writings had ignited the Reformation, but in his latter years he was scarcely active in it. As he neared the end of his life, Luther became more adamant about his beliefs. He declared the Pope to be the Antichrist, pushed for the expulsion of Jews from the empire, and approved of polygamy based on the patriarchs of the Old Testament. Luther died on February 18, 1546.